Hello and welcome back to another MiniBrute cookbook tutorial where we go through the Arturia MiniBrute 2 cookbook, try out all the recipes, see how they taste, see what we like, see what we don't, figure out how to make it work, figure out how to make them really cool. Today's episode is the sequencer without a sequencer. This is a practical example of using an LFO to trigger the envelopes. LFO1 triggers the ADSR envelope, while LFO2 triggers the AD envelope. Both LFOs are synced to the master clock. Set LFO1 wave to random to trigger the ADSR in an unpredictable way. This is kind of what it should sound like. Something along these lines. Now, you'll notice that it's just playing a sound, and I have to turn the volume down to turn it off. That's because, as is described, the LFOs are triggering the ADSR envelope or the AD envelope, right? Which are pre-wired to be the sort of sound on, sound off, right? The gate triggers the AD envelope, sound on, sound off. It's why it's pre-wired that way. That's just how that way it just works, okay? But since we're using the LFO to do that, it's, we don't have much control over when the note is going to play. It's going to go. But as always, we start from scratch, so let's do that. So we're going to unplug everything, put those back to standard. Make sure that your AD envelope is back on gate and once, for default anyway, right? So that way the synth is working predictably and we understand what's supposed to be happening with it. We'll turn that filter all the way open so we can actually hear. The filter modulation down, resonance down, everything else down, no brute factor, none of this stuff, yada, yada, yada. Okay, cool. And then we can kind of just leave the LFOs alone because, again, the LFOs don't really do anything until we activate them to do something anyway. So, you know what I mean? So it doesn't really matter. All right, so let's get into it. Number one, we need to start with sound, as always. So we have a lot of square wave, maybe a little over half of the triangle, and then a good deal of noise, too, okay? And that's just kind of like, there's our base ingredients. Kinda sounds, volume. Kinda sounds like that. Real I don't know. That seems awfully noisy to me, so I like to bring the noise down just a little bit on that one. Now, we're going to be using LFO1, which is pre-wired into the pulse width modulation. So we can put some of that up and adjust how much of the pulse width modulation we want in the sound. I'm going to turn the LFO1 up a little bit faster so we can hear it. Right? But I want it to be kind of, it's going to depend on what LFO1 does later on, so it doesn't really matter. But at least we can hear what's happening right now with the pulse width up a little bit. So I'm also going to use a little bit of metalizer. Turn that noise down so we can actually hear it. And it's very faint because right, the triangle wave is kind of down a little bit. But if we bring it up, then we can kind of tune in that a little bit of that modulation, a little bit of that timbre. And as always, it's seasoned to taste sort of thing. So okay, so now let's get into what the filter is doing, because this is where most of the action is happening, which is turning this sequencer into a sequence. All of this is just flavor. Do whatever you want there, right? But the filter, this is where the action happens. So first thing we're going to do is bring that cutoff down, right? Now we're going to use the the filter modulation and the decay envelope. Now we can hear the filter doing something, right? But remember, we're going to be using the LFOs to do this. So while we're over here, the next thing we're going to do is just put the AD envelope going. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because instead of gate mode and once, we're actually going to use trigger mode, where it just triggers, and then loop, where it keeps going. Now, just this alone, is pretty cool. And that on its own is you're kind of treating the AD envelope like it's an LFO. You don't really have much control over that, though. So it's kind of like the way it, right now. So there's a better way to handle that, but, for a conceptual, quick and dirty sort of thing, do that. It works great, right? Now, here's where it gets fun. So we're going to use our patch bay, right? We're going to take LFO1 and we're going to put that into the trigger for the ADSR envelope. And as long as it's... There we go. Okay. So now you'll notice that LFO1, as it goes up and down, changes how much of the... Or, you know, when it recycles, it's triggering that the ADSR envelope to open the filter, right? And so the recipe calls for a square wave, all right, on sequence mode, and something like this. The reason you want to use a square wave is because it's either on or off. So you're using LFO1 as a like a gate, essentially, right? Now, as the recipe describes, you can use LFO1 at random to trigger the ADSR in an unpredictable way, which is where we have it right now. So now, we can kind of hear what's happening a little bit easier. So that alone gives us some fun possibilities with what we can do with it. And we're getting way off base from where I started earlier, but that's okay, right? The whole point of this is to show that the LFOs can be used to turn this in, you know, to sequence things, even if you don't have the sequenced version, right? Which I do, which makes this a lot easier. And there's way simpler ways of doing that with the sequenced version, which I will talk about in another video, perhaps, when I get into the particulars of the sequenced version. But suffice it to say, there's a much easier way to do this, and you get a lot more control with the sequenced with the sequencer version of the MiniBrute. However, if you have, you know, the regular piano version of it, this regular synth version of it, you know, you can't sequence those notes, to my knowledge. So I could be wrong, but you know, this is a way to get that sort of sequenced sound and feeling without, you know, having to plug everything into a sequencer if you don't have one. Now, there's one more thing that we didn't do yet, which I got halfway on it. We plugged LFO2 into the trigger for the AD envelope, okay? And again, this one's going to be set a little bit different. So we're going to set it to this saw wave, and relatively quick to kind of get some quicker movement, and it's going to sound like this. So every time it loops, right, every time LFO2 triggers, it restarts the loop of the AD envelope. So now, that's basically what we're going for. That's basically the sound. That's the preset, right? And then it's just kind of an adjust to taste situation. You know what I mean? I like to, when I'm cooking food, you You know what I mean? Like when I'm cooking like regular food, I like to just, add seasonings until my Italian ancestors speak to me and say, "That's enough, my child." Right? So just kind of do the same thing with flavoring your synth. You just, when you want to I want to put a little bit of metalizer on this. So you go, let me hear that triangle wave. All right? And then you go, we just want you a little bit. We just turn it ever so slightly. Till we find the exact spot that we want, which isn't necessarily this, but for this example it is, right? Bring everything back in. Get it mixed. There you go. Now, of course, there's change the characteristics of the way that the synth and everything opens and closes with, just adjusting things at this point, right? So if you notice in the cookbook, something like the pulse width is turned all the way down, but the knob is red. That's because we're using that to sort of tune the timbre of the synth. Same thing with the mode for the filter, right? Maybe you want a more high-pitched sequence. Obviously, I'm a fantastic piano player, right? Me, personally, I like it as low as possible. Because I think this is one of the coolest sounding synths. And because we're using LFO1 as a square wave, we can now put some LFO1 on the ring modulation. Give it some interesting characteristics on the offbeat. You know what I mean? And so, just with that, got a really cool kind of bass line sort of thing going on, right? You know what I mean? So there you go. Maybe you don't have great timing. I have pretty decent timing because I'm a drummer, but maybe that's something you struggle with as a musician. That's okay. Everyone struggles with different things, different ways. That's all right. That's why we have tools like this to help us get where we want to go without having to bang our head against the wall too many times and too hard, right? It's like, just learn the tools and then, anything you're trying to build becomes that much easier, right? Which is the whole point of this entire cookbook thing, right? This is a very simple patch in concept, but you can do a lot of fun, different stuff with it if you're willing to be creative and to open up and see what happens, right? As always, experiment, have fun, be a good person, and we'll catch you in the next one.